Boy. Go. Cat. Dog. Run. Jump. House. Tree. Book. Flower. A Story of Loyalty. How a Dog Saved His Family, Part 2. Chapter 7. An Uncomfortable Shelter. Nightfall came swiftly, wrapping the boy, the dogs, and the injured cat in a thick blanket of darkness. The air was cool and damp, and the faint chirp of crickets was the only sound cutting through the silence. Exhausted from their encounter with the fierce dog and the long day of searching, the boy knew they couldn't keep moving through the park in the dead of night. He needed to find somewhere, anywhere, they could rest. "Come on, guys," he whispered, his voice steady but strained. The boy spotted a small, run-down shed partially hidden beneath the shadows of towering trees. Its roof sagged under the weight of moss, and the walls were cracked, but it was better than nothing. He approached cautiously, nudging the door open with a creak that echoed in the stillness. Inside, the air was musty, carrying the scent of damp wood and decay. The boy shivered as he stepped in, the dim moonlight filtering through a broken window and casting eerie shadows across the room. A few pieces of splintered furniture lay scattered, and the floor was covered with a thin layer of dust and leaves. It wasn't much, but it would have to do. Setting down the sling, the boy gently unwrapped the injured cat. "You'll be okay," he murmured, stroking its head. The cat purred faintly, its eyes half closed. Meanwhile, the beagle sniffed nervously around the room, its ears twitching at every creak of the old wood. The loyal dog positioned itself by the door, alert and protective, its eyes scanning the darkness outside. The boy rummaged through his backpack, pulling out a small bottle of water and a few scraps of food he had managed to collect earlier. "It's not a feast," he said with a wry smile, breaking a piece of bread into smaller portions, "but it'll keep us going." He fed the dogs first, their tails wagging despite the meager meal. The cat nibbled on a tiny piece of bread, clearly weak but determined. As they settled in, the boy couldn't shake the unease that crept over him. Every groan of the wind against the shed, every rustle of leaves outside, made his heart race. He kept glancing at the door, half expecting the fierce dog to burst through, or some other danger to emerge from the shadows. "We're safe here, for now," he whispered, more to convince himself than his companions. The beagle, unable to relax, began pacing near the walls, its nails clicking softly against the wooden floor. It stopped suddenly, staring intently at a dark corner. The boy's stomach tightened. "What is it?" he asked, his voice barely audible. He grabbed a stick he had brought in earlier, holding it tightly as he moved toward the corner. He held his breath and used the stick to prod the shadows. A loud squeak broke the silence as a rat darted out, scurrying across the floor and disappearing through a crack in the wall. The boy exhaled in relief, chuckling nervously. "Just a rat," he said, trying to sound brave. The beagle barked once, as if to say it had done its job. Despite the unsettling atmosphere, the boy knew they needed sleep to regain their strength. He placed the cat in a small nest of leaves he had gathered and leaned back against the wall, pulling his jacket tighter around him. The loyal dog lay by his side, its warm body providing comfort, while the beagle curled up near the cat, finally resting. As the boy closed his eyes, his mind raced with thoughts of their journey. The mysterious whistle that had called off the fierce dog, the strange park, and the sense that someone, or something, was watching them. He couldn't shake the feeling that this was more than just a random series of events. The night wore on, filled with restless dreams and moments of waking to check on his companions. The shed offered little comfort, but it was a haven in an otherwise treacherous world. As the first rays of dawn pierced through the broken window, the boy sat up, determination burning in his eyes. "We made it through the night," he said, scratching his loyal dog behind the ears. Now let's figure out what's waiting for us out there. With his team by his side, he pushed open the creaky door and stepped into the morning light, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Chapter 8. The Girl's Book. The morning sun cut through the misty air, bathing the park in a soft golden glow. The boy, the loyal dog, the injured cat, and the cautious beagle moved slowly along a dirt path, their senses heightened after the uneasy night in the shed. Each step carried a mixture of hope and trepidation. Somewhere in this labyrinth of trees and shadows, answers waited. And then, as if by fate, they stumbled upon a clearing where a young girl sat under an ancient tree, her head bent over a worn book. The girl's presence was startling in the otherwise empty park. She looked no older than 12, with tangled brown hair and a pair of glasses that seemed too large for her delicate face. She was engrossed in her book, her lips moving slightly as if reading aloud to herself. Around her, scattered wildflowers created a vibrant carpet, adding an almost magical touch to the scene. The boy hesitated, unsure whether to approach. But it was the beagle, wagging its tail and sniffing curiously, that made the first move. It trotted forward and barked once, sharp but friendly. The girl jumped, startled, her book falling to the ground. She looked up, her wide eyes meeting the boy's. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice a mix of curiosity and suspicion. The boy raised his hands in a gesture of peace. "I'm just passing through," he said cautiously, "and I think we need help." He gestured to the cat, still cradled in the sling, and the dogs, who now stood at his side, their tails wagging. The girl's expression softened as she took in the sight of the injured cat. "Oh no, is it hurt?" she asked, rushing forward without waiting for an answer. She knelt beside the boy and reached out to touch the cat gently. Her movements were careful, almost practiced, as though she'd done this before. "I found it like this," the boy explained. "We've been looking for a safe place, but it's been hard." The girl nodded solemnly, then glanced back at the book lying in the grass. "Wait here," she said, standing abruptly and darting toward her fallen treasure. She picked it up, brushing off the dirt, and flipped through the pages. After a moment, she turned back to the boy. "This book has everything," she said, holding it up like a prized possession. "Herbal remedies, first aid tips, and even maps of the park. It belonged to my mom. She gave it to me before Her voice trailed off, but her determination remained. "It might help us." The boy's curiosity was piqued. "Why are you here? Alone?" he asked. The girl hesitated, her fingers gripping the book tightly. "I'm not really alone. I'm waiting for someone, my brother. He said he'd come back for me. This tree was our meeting place." Her voice wavered, but she quickly masked her vulnerability. "Anyway, if you want to help your cat, we'll need to find some of these plants." She pointed to an illustration in the book, showing a cluster of flowers with bright yellow petals. Together, the boy and the girl set off, the dogs trailing behind them like guardians. The search for the flowers became an unexpected adventure, weaving through dense foliage and hidden corners of the park. Along the way, the girl shared snippets about the book, how it contained survival tips her mother had learned as a forest ranger, how it had become her guide through uncertain times. As they finally stumbled upon a patch of the yellow flowers, the girl knelt down and began collecting them with practiced care. The boy watched her, a mixture of admiration and gratitude blooming in his chest. "Thank you," he said quietly. She glanced up, smiling for the first time. "You'd do the same for me, wouldn't you?" With the flowers in hand, they returned to the clearing, where the girl mixed a makeshift paste using water from a nearby stream and leaves from her book's instructions. As she applied the paste to the cat's wound, the animal purred softly, a sign of relief. The boy couldn't help but feel a strange sense of hope. For the first time in days, it seemed like they were on the right path. But as the girl closed her book and looked toward the horizon, her expression darkened. "If you're going deeper into the park, you should know. It's not just wild animals you have to watch out for." "What do you mean?" the boy asked, his heart sinking. "There are people," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "People who don't want you to leave." Her words hung in the air, heavy with foreboding. The boy clenched his fists, determination hardening his resolve. Whatever lay ahead, he knew they would face it together. And with the girl's book as their guide, they might just stand a chance. Chapter 9. The Truck of Danger. The sun dipped low on the horizon, painting the sky in streaks of orange and purple. The boy and his unusual companions, a loyal dog, a brave but cautious beagle, the recovering cat, and now the book-carrying girl, pressed onward. The girl's warning about unseen dangers lingered in the boy's mind, each step weighed down by a growing sense of unease. But it wasn't until they heard the distant rumble of an engine that their journey took a truly perilous turn. The sound grew louder, echoing through the quiet park like an ominous drumbeat. The boy stopped in his tracks, his heart pounding. "Do you hear that?" he asked, his voice barely audible over the mechanical growl. The girl nodded, her grip tightening on the book. "It's a truck," she whispered. "But it's not just any truck. It belongs to them." Before the boy could ask who they were, the truck burst into view. It was massive, its rusty frame towering over the narrow park road. The headlights pierced through the fading light, casting long, sinister shadows. Inside the cab sat two men with hardened faces, their eyes scanning the area like predators searching for prey. "Run," the girl hissed, tugging at the boy's arm. The group darted off the path, disappearing into the dense underbrush. The dogs, sensing the urgency, stayed close, their movements silent and calculated. The cat, cradled in the boy's sling, let out a soft meow but remained still, its golden eyes wide with fear. The truck slowed, its engine idling ominously as the men inside stepped out. Their heavy boots crunched against the gravel, each step reverberating like a threat. "I know you're out there," one of the men called, his voice rough and taunting. "You think you can just wander through our territory?" The boy and the girl crouched behind a thick tree trunk, their breaths shallow. The boy's mind raced, trying to piece together what was happening. Who were these men? And why were they so determined to find intruders? The girl leaned in close, her voice barely above a whisper. "They're poachers," she explained. "They hunt animals in the park and sell them. But they're also after something else, something they don't want anyone to find." The boy's stomach churned. "Something like what?" he asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted the answer. Before the girl could respond, the beagle let out a low growl. The boy turned to see one of the men shining a flashlight dangerously close to their hiding spot. "Over here," the man barked, waving to his partner. Panic surged through the group. The girl clutched her book tightly, her eyes darting around for an escape route. "This way," she mouthed, pointing to a narrow gap between two trees. The boy nodded, and together they slipped through the gap, the dogs following close behind. The underbrush was thick, branches clawing at their clothes and faces as they ran. Behind them, the sound of the men's heavy footsteps grew louder. Just when it seemed like they couldn't run any farther, they stumbled into a small clearing. At its center was an old, abandoned ranger's hut. The structure was barely standing, its wooden beams rotted and its roof caved in. But it was their only option. "Inside," the girl urged, pushing open the creaking door. They piled into the hut, the boy quickly closing the door behind them. The interior was dark and smelled of damp wood and decay. The girl pulled out her book, flipping through the pages with shaking hands. "There's a trapdoor," she said, her voice trembling. "There has to be. My mom said all the ranger huts had them, in case of emergencies." The boy scanned the floor, his eyes adjusting to the dim light. "Over here," he whispered, spotting a small handle hidden beneath a layer of debris. They lifted the trapdoor, revealing a narrow tunnel that disappeared into darkness. The dogs jumped in first, followed by the boy and the girl. Just as the last of them descended, the door to the hut burst open, the men's flashlights cutting through the shadows. The boy held his breath, the tunnel's cool, earthy air chilling his skin. Above them, the men searched the hut, their frustration evident in their curses. After what felt like an eternity, the sound of their footsteps receded. When the silence finally settled, the girl let out a shaky breath. "That was too close," she said, clutching the book to her chest. The boy nodded, his heart still racing. "What are they hiding?" he asked. The girl hesitated, her gaze distant. "Something my mom found," she said softly. "Something that could change everything." As the group emerged from the tunnel, the boy realized their journey was far from over. The danger was real, and the stakes were higher than he'd ever imagined. But with each step, his resolve grew stronger. Together, they would uncover the truth, even if it meant facing the truck of danger again. Chapter 10: The Flower in the Yard. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting soft, golden light across the small yard that stretched behind the girl's modest home. The group had taken refuge there after their harrowing escape from the truck of danger. The boy, dog, beagle, and cat, alongside their courageous new friend, were finally able to catch their breath. It felt like a sanctuary, a fleeting moment of calm in their otherwise perilous journey. The boy leaned against a weathered fence, his eyes scanning the space. It wasn't much, an old shed, patches of grass, and a crooked tree, but something about the yard felt different. Special. At the very center was a small, vibrant flower, its petals a striking mix of red and yellow, glowing like fire in the early sunlight. The girl noticed him staring. "That's no ordinary flower," she said softly, kneeling beside it. She ran her fingers gently over the petals, her touch reverent. "My mom planted it here years ago. She said it was a symbol of hope. No matter what happens, it keeps blooming, even in the worst conditions." The boy crouched beside her, his curiosity piqued. "It's beautiful," he murmured. But as he looked closer, he saw a small, metal tag buried at the base of the flower. "What's that?" he asked, pointing to the tag. The girl hesitated before answering. "It's something my mom left behind. She said it's a clue, but I've never been able to figure out what it means." The boy carefully unearthed the tag, revealing faint, etched symbols. They weren't words exactly, more like a code or a map. The girl frowned, biting her lip. "I think it's connected to what those men were looking for. My mom always said the flower would lead us to the truth, but I never understood how." Before they could delve deeper, the dog barked, drawing their attention. The beagle stood stiffly by the back gate, growling at something, or someone, on the other side. The boy and the girl exchanged a nervous glance. Cautiously, the boy approached the gate. "Stay back," he whispered to the others, gripping the latch. With a deep breath, he swung it open. Standing on the other side was a man with a kind but weathered face. He held up his hands, showing he meant no harm. "Don't worry," he said in a gravelly voice. "I'm not here to hurt you. I'm here to help." The girl stepped forward, her eyes narrowing. "Who are you?" she demanded, clutching her book tightly. The man knelt, pulling something from his pocket. It was a faded photograph of the girl's mother, smiling and holding the same flower that now grew in the yard. "I was a friend of your mom's," he said. "And if you want to find what she left behind, you're going to need me." The boy and girl were stunned into silence. The man gestured toward the flower. "She told me this would be the key," he explained. "But it's only part of the puzzle. There's more to uncover, and those men in the truck aren't far behind. If we stay here too long, they'll catch up." The girl hesitated, looking at the flower. It felt like the last piece of her mother she had left. "What do we do?" she asked, her voice shaking. The man stood, his expression firm. "We take the flower," he said, "and we run. This journey isn't over. It's only just beginning." Reluctantly, the girl nodded. The boy gently dug up the flower, careful not to damage its roots, and placed it in a small pot. As they gathered their belongings and prepared to leave, the boy glanced back at the yard one last time. It no longer felt like a sanctuary. It felt like a goodbye. With the flower safely in hand, and the mysterious man leading the way, the group set off into the unknown. The boy couldn't shake the feeling that this flower, this simple, unassuming plant, held the answers they were searching for. And as they disappeared into the horizon, one thing was clear. The journey ahead would be their most dangerous yet. Chapter 11. The Temporary House. The group trudged through the dimming light of early evening, exhaustion etched into their faces. The boy carried the small flower pot carefully, as if it held the world's secrets, while the dog trotted protectively at his side. The beagle, still skittish from their recent run-ins, lagged behind, glancing nervously over its shoulder. The girl clutched her book tightly, her brow furrowed in thought. Ahead, the man, their new companion, led them with determined strides. They reached a narrow dirt road, flanked by dense trees whose branches clawed at the sky. At the end of the road stood a small, weather-beaten house. It looked forgotten, its wooden planks gray from years of neglect. The windows were grimy, and the front porch sagged slightly, but it was a shelter. "This is it," the man said, gesturing toward the house. "It's not much, but it's safe. At least for tonight." The boy and girl exchanged uncertain glances, but their exhaustion left no room for debate. They followed the man inside, their footsteps echoing in the eerily quiet space. The interior was sparse, a few mismatched pieces of furniture, a dusty rug, and the faint smell of damp wood. The dog sniffed around cautiously, while the beagle darted under a rickety table, its eyes wide with suspicion. The man lit an old oil lamp, casting flickering shadows across the room. He turned to the group, his voice low but firm. "We can't stay long," he warned. "Those men will be looking for us. But for now, rest. We move at first light." The boy set the flower pot gently on a table, his gaze lingering on its vibrant petals. "Why is this flower so important?" he asked, breaking the silence. The man sighed, pulling a chair closer. "It's not just a flower," he began. "Your mother, the girl's mother, left clues. Pieces of a puzzle that lead to something much bigger. This flower is one of those pieces. It's a symbol, but it's also a key." "A key to what?" the girl pressed, her voice trembling with urgency. "To answers," the man replied. "Answers about who's chasing us, about the secrets they're hiding. But the answers come with danger. You need to be ready for that." The boy nodded slowly, his resolve hardening. "We're ready," he said, though his hands trembled slightly. As the group settled in, tension hung in the air like a storm cloud. The boy couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, his eyes darting to the darkened windows. The dog growled softly, its ears pricking at every sound. Outside, the wind howled, rattling the shutters and masking the distant crunch of footsteps approaching the house. Suddenly, the girl's book slipped from her hands, falling open to a page she hadn't read before. Her eyes widened as she scanned the text. "Wait," she whispered, her voice barely audible. This is about the flower. It's a warning." The boy and man crowded around her as she read aloud. "The flower is a light in the darkness, but it must never fall into the wrong hands. It holds the power to reveal the truth and destroy it." The man's face darkened. "They're coming for it," he said grimly. "And they won't stop until they have it." The boy grabbed the flower pot, his heart pounding. "Then we can't let them find us here," he said. "We have to go." Before anyone could respond, a loud knock shattered the silence, echoing through the tiny house. Everyone froze, their breath caught in their throats. The dog barked furiously, while the beagle whimpered, retreating further into the shadows. The man motioned for silence, signaling the group to hide. "Stay quiet," he whispered urgently. "And no matter what happens, don't let them take the flower." As the knocking turned to pounding, the boy, girl, and their companions held their breath, bracing for what was to come.